direct involvement with.
Okay.
I mean, anybody, I could say things about them, but I can't say it firsthand about I saw them do this or I knew so-and-so and that sort of thing.
Okay. And the integration with Grady, is that something you want to talk about?
The hospital? I don't have a,
Some of the students led sit-ins that, helped get to the place where talks began.
see, the heart of that student movement was like 61 to 63, was it not? I mean, there were things that continued after that. And so I knew Ruby Doris, and Julian Bond, and of course worked with Carolyn Longbanks for years later on. But I was not in Atlanta in the heat, in the heart of that, right.
Okay. Okay. Well, let's just start with an introduction and give us your name and your titles and your background, how you came to Atlanta.
So we rolling?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
You're looking directly at Patricia.
I'm Nan Orock. I'm a senator in downtown Atlanta neighborhood district, and I served in the House for 10 terms. I'm finishing my 5th term in the Senate now, and I stepped into the March on Washington in 1963 and began a lifelong learning journey, and my activism really stems from my involvement that day in the march and how my life was touched and my understanding was broadened and my perspective and grasp of the civil rights movement, its scale, its scope, its importance, its significance, and the people within it, the individuals, all of that touched my life that day with a new sense of urgency. It had been something that was I was very much removed from, and from that day on, I connected with it and spent a lot of years actually in civil rights work. That led me to go back to my campus in Virginia, Mary Washington College, and work to engage students there in being involved in supporting the needs of the black community in Fredericksburg, Virginia, and educating ourselves and reaching out and educating other students and connecting with activist students on other campuses. So I was at an all-white girls' school, state school, and I believe it was my senior year before we had a full-time black female student enrolled. And I started there in the fall of 61 and graduated in the spring of 65. It was the it was really through the Race Relations Committee on campus that was sponsored by the YWCA, the Young Women's Christian Association, that I found a place for activism as a student. And the Y then and now continues to have a priority emphasis on eliminating racism. And they were one of the few voices of moderation on a white Southern campus, particularly on the female campuses in the South. And the Y brought us to Atlanta. Now, my daddy was raised in South Georgia, Mitchell County, was son of a sharecropper, 12 children, and very, very much a Georgian. That was on my father's side, and my mother was from rural East Tennessee, and then we were raised in Virginia. So coming back to Georgia for civil rights work was a really different homecoming than back to the family that had raised my father. So we came down on spring weekend of '64, Easter weekend, and the group of students that I was with went to Ebenezer, and Dr. King was there, actually talking to a class in a Sunday school room about nonviolence, and we met the SNCC workers that weekend. We were trained in voter registration and actually knocked on doors in Buttermilk Bottom and asking people to register to vote. And that was a neighborhood, really without even paved streets down in the heart of downtown Atlanta, called Buttermilk Bottom because when you had a heavy rainstorm, it was a soupy, flooded area kind of tinted by the Georgia red clay. And it's where the Civic Center is now. But little did I imagine that one day I would be asking people in those neighborhoods to vote for me decades later. So that weekend, again, was very important because I connected with SNCC and stayed in touch with them, and they sent all of their information up to us at Mary Washington, and I was able to disseminate things about SNCC's work to my fellow students, and then learned about the Mississippi Summer and came down to Georgia just as soon as I finished the school year. A classmate and I both came down to work for SNCC full-time for the summer as part of the Mississippi Summer Project. And I went to work for Julian Bond, who ran the communications department. And it was there that I learned about the Atlanta student movement and about the rich history of struggle right here in Atlanta, really spearheaded by students at the historic Black college gathering of, this is the largest, I believe it's the largest collection of Black higher education institutions in the world, and I was working under Julian in the communications office, and he had, of course, come out of that movement. And Ruby Doris Robinson was an activist in that movement that was, by the time I got here, she was running the SNCC office. And SNCC had been formed at the Shaw University a few years earlier. Uh-huh, yeah.
And yeah, the SNCC headquarters, well, the headquarters of SNCC will be a marker, and we're gonna put it right
Well, there's
across-
two, there's Nelson or Raymond.
Yeah, I understand there was 3.
Okay, then there was
Yeah.
one before I ever knew about it.
Right, and so, it's gonna go right over there in the 80s, are you ready?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and so if you could tell us more what it was like in the headquarters.
Right.
Since you worked communications, and some of the key figures you already mentioned, Julian Bond and Ruby Doris.
Mm-hmm. So I was very fortunate to be working directly with Julian Bond. He was running the communications office for SNCC, and Mary King was another young person in that office with Julian, and she's since written books about the experience of working in the Deep South, and has worked for a lifetime on efforts to bring peace. And I still stay in touch with her today, as I do Julian. I laughed today when people go through an elaborate application and resume and interview process to come on board. We just showed up. In those days, you were willing heart and willing hands, and you showed up and they put you to work. And the first thing Julian put me doing was creating the stencil, typing the big long article called "The Status of the Negro in Alabama," or "The Condition of the Negro in Alabama," which was a study prepared by SNCC's research arm that was housed right there in that building. And the day I came down to SNCC to start my volunteer work with them, my father had driven me down because he had a meeting in Athens, Georgia, and he said, "Well, I'll just drive you over to Atlanta." I said, "Well, I'll take the bus." No, he insisted on driving me, and then he came to see, as he drove me to the boarding house where my college roommate had found us a place to live, and he realized I was living in the Black community, and then she said, "Well, Aaron is over at the SNCC office," the landlady did. My father said, "Well, we'll go over there." He didn't know what SNCC was. And there I wound up with my dad walking behind me up the steps of this narrow little staircase up to the second floor of the building. I believe we were over at dry cleaners. And friends that I had met in the spring when I had been down there for the weekend greeted me warmly, and big SNCC posters all over the wall, and my father's eyes just got bigger and bigger and bigger. And then we went, it was Sunday afternoon, early afternoon, and they said, "Let's go eat. Y'all have meeting?" No. And we went down to Pascal's, historic Pascal's, on Hunter Street. Now, this was West Hunter Street then, which of course now is MLK. And that's my father couldn't eat a bite. I'm sure he had never been in a restaurant, sitting down side by side eating with African Americans, coming from working in the fields in South Georgia. So that was my first day at SNCC, and he left in a state of great upset. But a lot of us had to upset our parents back then. And I understand from the black perspective, black kids had to upset their parents as well. But certainly Southern white parents, I had not planned to tell him what I was doing. And he kind of stumbled into it. I was going to just come down here and work for the summer because I was working my way through college. And so that was the beginning of an incredible summer, and of course the experience of Mississippi Summer '64. And James Bond, who used to be a city council member, Julian's younger brother, was there as well. And we were the night crew. We were really the youngest, newest, wet behind the ears kids that would stay up and work the night shift, and you'd get calls all night from Mississippi. This SNCC was fielding a full operation, working with the Council of Federated Organizations, COFO, running that Mississippi Summer project. And so you had SNCC workers all over the state and phoning in, and if there was a church being burned, a cross being burned, somebody missing, somebody being chased on the highway, some kind of Klan activity, all of those things were things that we were the nerve center for, to try to get help, to try to raise an alert, to call the press, to call the Justice Department, to call the FBI, and to be some place that had a 24/7 operation for the workers in the field. And so you were every night capturing all the calls that came in and typing up the reports so that the leadership could come in the morning and know what needed to be done, what was next, and follow up on any of the things that happened overnight. And then I was going, as my day job to earn money, I was working out at the Veterans Administration Hospital with an old fan blowing on us and working and typing for typing up government forms. So that's how I earned enough money to, put food on the table and underwrite my expenses for the summer. And then we actually stayed in SNCC apartments. SNCC would rent a Freedom House for the men, one for the women, which were apartments, and we kind of slept in shifts, sharing beds, and I'd sleep during the day. And so that was a summer of a further deepening of my understanding of the movement and the dynamics in the community and the history of the civil rights struggle, which of course had long history. And I really had my eyes opened as a white Southerner, and that began on the day of the march, understanding that I was had really been deliberately miseducated, and as a white person in the South, you can be raised up to not acknowledge, not even know or be aware of, and certainly not act on all of the discrimination and the inequality that is absolutely in your face. But white Southerners are quite carefully raised to somehow justify that or rationalize it or overlook it or be in denial about it. I mean, all of those pathways, I think, are the pathways that people went down. So it was a huge awakening to know that I had been deliberately miseducated as a white Southerner, deliberately miseducated, and that all the things that we were taught in civics class about equality and justice and liberty and all of those stirring words of the Founding Fathers were, in fact, in the real world and in real life on a day-to-day basis, violated at every moment by the way that African American people were treated, and the laws and the oppression, all of that they were subjected to, and so that those are lessons, those insights, those awakenings stay with you for a lifetime, and really, so I resolved very early on that I was going to be on the right side of history. I was going to be somebody who stood up and fought against this, and to be an ally to people of color, and speak out, and take on, as SNCC, very wisely directed us to, educating white people, sharing my insights with fellow white people who are laboring under all of these same misimpressions and, willful and deliberate and also unconscious. So that was my summer with SNCC, and I really wanted to stay and not go back to school, but my mother pretty much sent a relative down to haul me back and get me back in school for my senior year. And we continued organizing. And then SNCC, Stanley Wise, Stokely Carmichael, Willie Ricks, Michael Simmons, Featherstone, different SNCC people came up and helped us. We organized a statewide organization to do community organizing in black belt counties in Virginia in summer of '65. And SNCC, people say, you can't be serious. Yes, SNCC sent us a check every month. We were an organization that they supported and mentored and encouraged. And we were organizing in some of the counties in Southside Virginia are 80% black. It's the upper tip of the Black Belt South. The whole plantation culture that stretches all across the Deep South and all the way up into Virginia and hits Maryland too. So that is a long way of saying that I had a very deep and meaningful experience in Atlanta, mentored by Julian Bond and others in SNCC. John Lewis, of course, was the chairman then, and who knew that all of us later, Julian, in a very few short years, would run for office right here in Atlanta and go to the General Assembly and be denied his seat 3 times until the Supreme Court forced him to force them to seat him.
They're giving us the signal, but.
Okay, yeah, okay, well, so tell me, what do you want me to hit?
The movement lawyers.
Oh, that's great. My son's an attorney, and I always poo-poo the attorney jokes because I said, I know what a difference it made in the civil rights movement to have attorneys that would go in there and go to bat for us. Now, that history is laid out. You can read whole books about how Thurgood Marshall and a raft of African-American attorneys and some white allies, attorneys, worked to at every turn to hammer away at injustice and represent civil rights workers and aggrieved African Americans in the court system and won victories, and that happened over and over. We were, Donald Holloway and actually Julian's brother-in-law were critically important. Jane Moore's husband, Howard Moore. They were huge players, and our SNCC office was right up the street from them. We saw them on a daily basis, and you'd go down to Tibbs Pharmacy that would give us lunch tickets. You'd go to Busy Bee for breakfast. You'd go to Pascal's. We were right there in the heart of that commercial stretch of West Hunter Street, and very supported by the merchants. But certainly, the underpinning that those lawyers gave the movement can never be accurately. You can never say enough about them. It was made all the difference in the world. If we had been out there on our own, without any legal backing, without the commitment of those attorneys, and when you think about attorneys like down in Albany, Georgia, the King family, Slater King, and the things that they went up against. So the Atlanta movement, the student movement, and all that it gave rise to. I mean, Julian served in office here with a very distinguished career in the Georgia Senate, and I delight today in reminding my fellow senators of the trajectory of Julian Bond, who was denied by the Georgia legislature a seat until the courts made them seat him. To think of, I mean, he came out of this Atlanta student movement, and of course out of a family that historically were leaders in the black community. The contributions of Ruby Doris Robinson, the impact of the black higher education institutions here, and the movements that sprang from those campuses, and I think that dynamic interplay between SNCC and SCLC, right here is where they were both headquartered. And the SNCC element was youthful, idealistic, and did not take kindly to being pushed off to the side or denigrated. They were out there organizing and putting their lives on the line, and so there were many interesting conversations about the between SCLC and SNCC and that dynamic. We worked with SCLC young workers up in Virginia when we were there, but and you know, of course, Carolyn Long Banks and so many others who came out of the Atlanta student movement went on to make huge civic contributions right here in the city of Atlanta. And Julian Bond and many others were on the national stage. Bernice Reagan founded Sweet Honey in the Rock. She came out of the Albany student movement. She was part of SNCC Freedom Singers. When they kicked students out at Albany State for marching on the courthouse, she came up here and was able to finish her degree at Spelman and go on to earn a PhD and preside over the Black Diaspora program at the Smithsonian. When you think of the rich talent and leadership and contributions that can be traced back directly to the movement of black students in the South, and in particular the Atlanta student movement, and also the walls that were torn down. I mean, Dr. King, if you just connect the dots, the students were moving on Riches, downtown department store, the Magnolia. Dr. King came and participated and presented and was locked up and sent to Reidsville, and somebody figured out it was smart for Jack Kennedy to call Coretta Scott King and help them locate where they had put Martin Luther King up there in the Reidsville prison. And the next thing you know, we had Jack Kennedy as the President of the United States with a strong backing from black voters in the black community. Direct connections to the student movement right here in Atlanta. Rich history, and of course Michael Julian Bond, son of Julian Bond, serves on City Council today. So the legacy of that movement is timeless, and I am so pleased that under Michael Julian Bond's leadership, we're moving forward to really capture the meaning and the significance of that movement, honor those who were the foot soldiers and the leaders in that movement, and recognize and acknowledge their contributions and create a body of work and knowledge that can be passed on and can inspire the next generations, because it's always the young people that kick down the doors and take us to new places.
Thank you. That's so awesome. I got
Watch your head.
goosebumps.
Watch your head.
Anybody else get goosebumps?